So in this section, we're going to examine the physical and chemical characteristics of normal urine from a healthy individual. But we will also examine some conditions as well as diseases that alter the characteristics of urine. So recall that the filtrate that is produced and processed by the kidney comes from the fluid of the blood. That is, it comes from the blood plasma. And the filtrate, once it is processed by the kidney, is what ultimately becomes urine. Therefore, the composition of the urine will somewhat resemble and reflect what is already in the bloodstream. The urine simply has a higher concentration of things like wastes within it because it's the job or the function of the kidney to remove these wastes and eliminate them through the urine. The urine from a healthy person typically has no cells or proteins within it because a healthy filtration membrane is intact and does not allow these things to appear in the urine. So for that reason, urine is approximately 95% water, and the remaining 5% of the volume of urine is taken up by the substances that are dissolved within it, called the solutes. And these solutes include things like sodium, potassium, phosphate, bicarbonate, as well as the nitrogenous wastes. And the nitrogenous wastes are things like urea, uric acid, as well as creatinine. The urea comes from the breakdown of amino acids within the body and the breakdown of proteins. The uric acid comes from the breakdown of nucleic acids like DNA. And creatinine comes from the breakdown of a substance called creatine phosphate, which is a substance that is similar to ATP, and it's used by muscles in order to act as an energy source for generating the contractions, or act as an ATP-like source in the generation of normal muscle contractions. So as far as physical attributes are concerned, typically healthy urine should be clear or transparent. It's only cloudy during things like urinary tract infections, and sometimes certain foods or beverages can also alter the clarity of urine. However, these changes, for the most part, are harmless. It has a pale yellow to deep yellow color due to the presence of a yellow pigment that's called urochrome, and urochrome comes from the breakdown of hemoglobin. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes certain drugs can alter the color of urine, as well as biopigments or foods such as beets can alter the urine's normal color and appearance. Foods like beets will typically turn the urine a pink or a red color. Meanwhile, biopigments can add a brown or orange hue to the urine, and certain drugs such as antibiotics or anti-inflammatories can also cause the urine to become either orange or brown in color. And typically these color changes are also harmless. Typically, fresh voided urine will be aromatic, but it should not have an ammonia smell. The ammonia odor comes from bacterial breakdown of urea if the urine is left standing for long periods of time. So that is, bacteria that are in the air and in the atmosphere will metabolize the urea to create ammonia, and that's typically what creates that ammonia scent from urine that has been standing for long periods of time. Certain diseases and conditions can alter the smell of urine. So, for instance, diabetes mellitus causes the production of substances called ketones. Ketones come from the metabolism of fats for energy. And high numbers of ketones in the urine can cause the urine to smell like acetone. Typically, urine has a mildly acidic pH of approximately 6. The pH can change due to a wide variety of causes, including diet as well as infections or other conditions. Diet can change the pH of urine quite considerably, in that high-protein diets can actually decrease the urine pH, making the urine more acidic, because recall that a decrease in pH means that that substance is becoming more acidified. Meanwhile, vegetarian diets can increase the urine pH, making the urine more alkaline. Urinary tract infections can also increase the pH of urine because bacterial metabolism of infectious bacteria produces alkaline substances, and most of the bacteria that infect humans do well in alkaline environments, and so those bacteria tend to create alkaline environments in the places that they inhabit. The final variable that we're going to consider in examining the physical and chemical characteristics of urine is a variable that's called specific gravity. Now, specific gravity is a ratio, so that means it's a dimensionless number, and it is the ratio of the mass of a substance, such as urine, compared to the mass of an equal volume of pure water. So pure water has a specific gravity of 1.000. So any substance that has dissolved solutes or electrolytes in it will have a specific gravity that is slightly greater than 1, because then that means that there's more mass in that particular fluid. So basically, the specific gravity gives us an indication of how many solutes are dissolved in that liquid and how concentrated or dilute those solutes are, because the specific gravity will be higher if there's more dissolved solutes, and the specific gravity will be lower if there's fewer dissolved solutes. So because urine is mostly water, but it does contain a few dissolved solutes, electrolytes, and wastes, that means that the specific gravity of urine is close to that of water, but just a little bit above it. Typically, the range of specific gravity for urine is 1.001 on the low end to 1.035 on the higher end. So when we are extremely well hydrated and we are producing large volumes of very dilute urine, that means the specific gravity of that urine will be extremely low. So because there's more water and less solutes in it, so that specific gravity will tend towards the 1.001 end of the scale. On the other hand, if we are extremely dehydrated, or even maybe not extremely dehydrated, but just dehydrated enough that we are producing small volumes of very concentrated urine, that means that that urine will have less water in it and will contain a higher concentration of solutes, meaning that the specific gravity is going to be higher near the 1.035 end of that scale. So here we'll examine a couple of abnormal components in urine and what their possible causes are. We'll start with glucose. So glucose is normally present in the filtrate. That is, it's normally found making its way through the kidney tubules after the blood has been filtered by the glomerulus and the glomerular capillaries. However, that glucose is typically reabsorbed by the proximal tubule of the kidney tubules, and so therefore very little glucose, if any, should be present in the urine of a healthy individual. So glucose is present in the filtrate, but normally in a healthy person, most or all of that gets reabsorbed by the kidney tubules, and so very little, if any, will be present in the urine. The presence of glucose in the urine can be caused by a few things. The first is that if someone has consumed a high amount of sugar in a short period of time, because consuming a very sugary food or beverage causes the glucose transporters in the kidney tubules to become overwhelmed. So normally these transporters will reabsorb glucose from the proximal convoluted tubule back into the blood so that glucose is not lost to the urine. But when there is a very high amount of glucose present in the filtrate, the transporters have a difficult time reabsorbing it all before it leaves the kidney tubules and enters the collecting duct. So any glucose that is not reabsorbed is going to appear in the urine. Another cause is diabetes mellitus, which is a condition in which blood glucose levels remain elevated for long periods of time because the elevated blood glucose, or because the blood glucose is elevated, that means that high amounts of glucose will also be present in the filtrate, which will then, just like earlier, as I mentioned, overwhelm the glucose transporters in the kidney tubules, and inevitably a lot of this glucose will also appear in the urine. So high glucose in the urine, regardless of the cause, is referred to as glycosuria. Next, we'll look at proteins. The presence of proteins in the urine typically comes from severe hypertension, that is, severe high blood pressure, because high blood pressure can damage the capillaries of the nephrons and cause proteins to leak into the filtrate and then also be visible in the urine as well. The kidney tubules, so the proximal tubule, the nephron loop, and the distal tubule, do not have transporters for proteins. That is, they are not able to reabsorb protein from the filtrate back into the bloodstream. So any protein that is in the filtrate is going to appear in the urine. So sometimes excessive physical exertion or even high blood pressure created during pregnancy and cause proteins to appear in the urine. The presence of proteins in the urine, regardless of the cause, is referred to as proteinuria. Next, we'll look at the presence of ketone bodies, and ketone bodies indicate that our body is metabolizing fat more than it is metabolizing glucose as an energy source. When fats are metabolized as fuel in order to create ATP, it creates a byproduct known as ketone bodies. Typically, since glucose is the primary fuel source of the body, the amount of ketones in the blood and in the urine are typically very low because the body will preferentially metabolize glucose and then it will start to metabolize some lipids and fats, keeping the amount of ketones very, very low in a typical healthy individual. However, when the body is unable to metabolize glucose, which is the case with an individual who has untreated diabetes mellitus, the body has to turn to fats and lipids as its primary source of fuel for making ATP, which then will elevate the ketone concentration in the blood and in the filtrate and in the urine as well. Ketones can also be present for individuals on low carbohydrate diets or who are practicing intermittent fasting. The presence of ketone bodies in the urine is referred to as ketonuria. So if hemoglobin is present in the urine, this is typically a sign of hemolytic anemias, which are caused by the destruction of red blood cells, typically during transfusion reactions, that is when mismatched blood types are transfused, or by destruction of the red blood cells by something like a malaria parasite infection. The presence of hemoglobin in the urine is referred to as hemoglobinuria. And finally, we will look at, we have two more here. We will look at the presence of whole erythrocytes in the blood as well. When whole erythrocytes are present in the urine, that is because the kidneys may have experienced a physical trauma, that is physical damage, can damage the capillaries in the nephron and in the glomerulus, and that could cause red blood cells to appear in the urine. It could also be due to kidney stones damaging the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, or the urethra. So the presence of erythrocytes in the urine, regardless of the cause, is referred to as hematuria. And finally, the last substance that we'll take a look at are the presence of leukocytes in the urine. Leukocytes may be present in the urine during a kidney infection or during a urinary tract infection. If the infection happens to be bacterial, the urine may also have a high pH of greater than 7 because bacterial metabolism produces alkaline substances in order to create an ideal environment for those bacteria to flourish. The presence of leukocytes in the urine is referred to as pyuria.